In the rain, she wore a simple linen dress, slightly faded from too many washes, her dark hair pulled back in a loose knot. No jewelry, no pretense, just quiet strength worn thin from years of holding everything together while no one noticed. From the hallway, Ricardo's voice cut through the silence like shattered glass. "You're always like this, Elena. Cold, distant, like I'm talking to a ghost." She didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the piano. "I made your favorite soup last night. Left it in the fridge. You didn't even open the container." He stepped into the room, expensive cologne masking the scent of someone else's perfume. His suit was crisp, his shoes polished, but his eyes were hollow. Tired, not from work, from pretending. "Soup." He let out a dry laugh. "You think soup fixes everything? We're not teenagers anymore. I need passion, Elena. Fire. Not this." He gestured vaguely at her, at the room, at their life. "You stopped trying years ago." Her chest tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "I stopped trying the day you started looking at me like I was furniture. Something useful, but forgettable." He flinched just slightly, then recovered with anger. "Don't twist this on me. You're the one who turned into a shadow. You used to smile when I walked in. Now you barely look up." "I stopped smiling," she whispered, finally turning to face him. "The first time you lied about where you'd been. The second time you came home smelling like her perfume. The third time you said, 'I love you,' and meant it for someone else." His jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt? Regret? But it vanished fast, replaced by defensiveness. "You don't know anything about her." "I know enough," she said, voice breaking just once. "I know you'd rather be with her than here, so go. But don't pretend this is my failure. Don't make me the villain because you got bored of loyalty." He stepped closer, towering over her. "You think you're so noble? So perfect? You gave me nothing but silence and duty. She gives me life." Elena didn't back away. She looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, he saw her not as his wife, but as a woman who had loved him fiercely, quietly, relentlessly, and was now letting go. "You're wrong," she said softly. "I gave you everything. My youth, my dreams, my trust, and you traded it for a fantasy." He raised his hand, not to strike, not yet, but the threat hung in the air like lightning before the thunder. She didn't flinch. She just closed her eyes for a second, as if saying goodbye to the man she once believed he was. And in that silence, the first drop of rain hit the window. Outside, the sky cracked open. Inside, something in Elena broke, and then hardened. She turned back to the piano, opened the lid, and ran her fingers over the keys. A single, mournful note echoed through the room. Ricardo stood there, drenched in his own pride, watching the woman who built his world walk away from it. Not with rage, but with unbearable grace. He didn't know it yet, but this was the last time he'd see her as his wife. This was the beginning of his fall, and hers her rise. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada tópico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobrio tópico tu com dialogo como seu fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com muita moco. Com muitos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters Quinn 3, max the city glittered below like a sea of broken promises, but Ricardo didn't see it that way. To him, it was proof he'd made it. The corner office, the tailored suits, the private lunches at places where you didn't need a menu because they knew your name. And yet, something gnawed at him, a quiet emptiness that no promotion could fill. That's when he met her. Camila. She wasn't just beautiful. She was alive. Her laugh cut through boardroom fatigue like sunlight through fog. She wore red lipstick like armor and spoke in riddles that made him feel clever just for trying to solve them. First, it was just coffee after a conference. Then late-night texts. Then secrets whispered in dimly lit bars where no one knew his name. Only hers. "You're different with me," she said one evening. tracing the rim of her wineglass with a fingertip painted the same crimson as her lips. Not the CEO, not the husband, just Ricardo. He leaned in, the scent of her perfume, jasmine and something sharper, like danger, filling his lungs. "Because with you, I don't have to be perfect." She smiled, slow and knowing. "Perfect is boring. I like men who want." And he did. God, he wanted. Not just her body, though that was intoxicating, but the way she made him feel, desired, reckless, young again. Like the years of quiet dinners with Elena, the unspoken routines, the careful avoidance of conflict. Like all of it had been a cage he hadn't even noticed until she handed him the key. Back home, Elena moved like a ghost through their mansion. She'd started noticing the little things, the faint trace of unfamiliar perfume on his collar, the way he checked his phone under the dinner table, the new distance in his eyes when she spoke. But she said nothing, not because she didn't care, but because she was tired of begging for attention from a man who'd already left. One night, she found a receipt in his coat pocket. Le Jardin, a restaurant they'd never been to. 2 glasses of wine. Dessert for 2. Date. Last Tuesday, the night he'd told her he was working late. She held the slip of paper in her trembling hand, staring at it like it might burst into flame. The next morning, over breakfast, scrambled eggs, fresh orange juice, the same routine for 15 years. She finally spoke. "Who is she?" Ricardo froze, fork halfway to his mouth. He didn't deny it, didn't even look surprised. Just set the fork down slowly, as if handling something fragile. "Does it matter?" he asked, voice cool. Her breath hitched. "It matters to me." He finally met her eyes, and there was no shame in them, only impatience. "Her name's Camila. She's everything you're not." The words landed like a slap. Elena didn't cry. Not then. She just stood, took her plate to the sink, and rinsed it with steady hands. But inside, something shattered. Later that day, Ricardo met Camila at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. She wore a dress that shimmered like liquid gold, her hair loose around her shoulders. She kissed him the moment he sat down, bold, public, possessive. "You told her?" she asked, eyes gleaming. "I did." "And?" He shrugged, swirling his whiskey. She didn't scream, didn't beg, just accepted it, like I was telling her the weather. Camila laughed, a bright, careless sound. "Good. I hate drama. Besides..." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent heat down his spine. "You belong with someone who sees you, not someone who just tolerates you." He believed her, desperately. He didn't see the way her eyes flickered to his watch, Rolex, anniversary gift from Elena. He didn't notice how she steered every conversation toward his assets, his connections, the size of the house. He only saw what he wanted, a woman who made him feel like a king. Meanwhile, Elena sat alone in the library that night, moonlight spilling across the Persian rug. She opened the safe behind the bookshelf, not for money, but for the marriage certificate. She ran her fingers over their signatures, faded with time. 15 years, 2 miscarriages. Countless nights she stayed up worrying while he slept soundly. Every sacrifice she'd made thinking love was enough. Now she knew the truth. Love without respect is just slow suffocation. And Camila? She wasn't a rival. She was a mirror, showing Ricardo exactly what he'd become. A man who traded loyalty for illusion, depth for dazzle. But Ricardo didn't know that yet. He was too busy drowning in her laughter, blind to the fact that she wasn't pulling him up. She was pulling him under. And the deeper he sank, the brighter Elena's resolve burned. Not with rage. Elena stood near the edge of the room, a silent observer in her own home. She hadn't wanted to come, but leaving would have looked like surrender. So she wore her calm like armor, sipping water, smiling politely at guests who barely glanced her way anymore. Then it happened. A guest, a new investor, leaned toward Ricardo and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "So, is this the wife who built your first company while you were still in grad school?" The legend. Ricardo stiffened. Camila's smile turned icy. Before Elena could respond, Ricardo cut in, voice sharp with forced cheer. Elena's always been supportive, sure, but that was a lifetime ago. Camila's the one who gets me now. The room went quiet for half a breath. Elena felt it, the shift, the humiliation, the erasure, not just of her contribution, but of her very presence. She set her glass down carefully, as if it might shatter if handled too roughly. Later, in the hallway, away from the music and the false warmth, she confronted him. You told them I was nothing. He was already loosening his tie, impatient. Don't be dramatic. It was one comment. One comment. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of years collapsing. I mortgaged my mother's house to fund your startup. I worked nights while you slept. I held you when your father died and you couldn't cry in front of anyone else. And tonight, in front of strangers, you acted like I was your maid. He turned on her, eyes blazing. Maybe if you'd acted like a wife instead of a martyr, I wouldn't have looked elsewhere. The words hung in the air like smoke. Then, without warning, he shoved her. Not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to make her stumble back into the wall. Her head cracked against the wood paneling. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. Blood bloomed on her lower lip where her teeth had cut through. Silence. Even the distant music seemed to stop. Ricardo stared at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. For a flicker, just a heartbeat, he looked horrified. But then Camila appeared at the end of the hall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. And whatever remorse had surfaced in him hardened into defiance. You made me do that, he muttered, not meeting Elena's eyes. Elena pressed a hand to her lip, came away red. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just looked at him, really looked, and in that gaze was the death of something sacred. You didn't just push me, she whispered, voice raw but steady. You pushed away every reason I ever had to believe in you. She turned and walked away, bare feet silent on the cold floor, leaving him standing there with his guilt and his mistress and the hollow shell of the man he used to be. Upstairs, in the bathroom, Elena stared at her reflection. Blood smeared her chin. Her eyes, once soft, now burning with quiet fire, held no tears, only resolve. She washed the blood away. Then she opened the drawer beneath the sink and pulled out a small digital recorder she'd bought weeks ago. After the first missed calls, the late nights, the lies that no longer even tried to sound convincing, she pressed record. I'm safe, she said softly, voice trembling only slightly. But I won't be if I stay. Downstairs, the party continued. Laughter rose like smoke. Camila laughed loudest of all. But Elena was already gone. Not in body, not yet, but in spirit. The woman who loved Ricardo unconditionally had just died in that hallway. What remained was someone stronger. Someone who remembered every promise he broke. And somewhere, deep in the storm gathering outside, fate began to turn. Because the night he raised his hand was the night he signed his own ruin. Ricardo watched her from the doorway of the bedroom, arms crossed, jaw tight. Camila stood just behind him, arms folded too, lips curled in a smirk that didn't quite hide her impatience. You're really doing this? Ricardo asked, voice low, almost pleading, but not quite. Elena didn't look up. She folded a sweater slowly, deliberately. You already did it for me. The night you shoved me. The night you let her stand there and watch. She's not the issue, he snapped. This is about us. No, Elena said, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were dry, clear, terrifyingly calm. This stopped being about us the moment you chose to believe I was replaceable. Camila stepped forward then, her heels clicking like a countdown. Look, Elena. Can I call you Elena? This is clearly painful for everyone, but Ricardo and I, we're building something real. You clinging to this house, to this life, it's just making things harder. Elena studied her. The perfect hair, the calculated sympathy, the way her fingers brushed Ricardo's arm like she was marking territory. You think this house is what I care about? Camila blinked. Isn't it? It's worth millions. A sad smile touched Elena's lips. You see, a mansion. I see every sleepless night I spent worrying if we'd lose it. Every birthday I skipped so he could close a deal. Every time I swallowed my pride so his image wouldn't crack. She turned to Ricardo. You gave her the keys. Fine. But remember this, you didn't just give her a house. You gave her the illusion that love can be bought. Ricardo's face darkened. Don't make this poetic. You're leaving. That's it. No, she said softly. You're throwing me out. There's a difference. He hesitated just for a second. Then, with a sharp motion, he pulled a set of keys from his pocket and tossed them onto the bed beside her suitcase. Then go. And don't come back. Elena picked up the keys. Not hers anymore. She placed them gently in Camila's open palm. Take good care of it, she said, voice barely above a whisper. It breaks easily. Then she lifted her suitcase and walked out. No dramatic slam. No tears. Just the soft click of the front door closing behind her. Outside, the sky was gray. Rain threatened but didn't fall. She stood on the driveway for a long moment, breathing in air that suddenly felt freer, even if it carried the chill of uncertainty. Behind her, through the tall windows, she saw Camila twirl the keys on her finger, laughing as she dragged Ricardo toward the master suite like it was a prize she'd won. Elena turned away. She didn't call a cab. She walked, block after block, suitcase rolling behind her, heels clicking against wet pavement. People passed her without a glance. Just another woman in a linen dress, carrying too much in too small a bag. But inside her chest, something was shifting, not breaking, awakening. Hours later, in a dimly lit diner on the edge of town, she slid into a booth and ordered black coffee. Across from her, her oldest friend, Marisol, a sharp-eyed lawyer with a heart of steel, listened in silence as Elena recounted everything. When she finished, Marisol didn't offer pity. She leaned forward, voice low and fierce. You know the house is legally half yours, right? Maybe more, given the violence. Elena stirred her coffee, watching the swirl. I don't want it for the money. Then why? Elena looked out the window. A homeless man huddled under an awning, shivering in the drizzle. She thought of how easily she could have ended up like him, discarded, invisible. Because, she said, voice steady, if I let him take it all, he wins, and I refuse to let cruelty be rewarded. Marisol nodded slowly. Then we fight, not with screams, with documents, with truth. Elena took a sip of coffee, bitter, strong, like her new resolve. Back at the mansion, Ricardo poured himself a drink, trying to ignore the hollow echo in the halls. Camila was already redecorating, moving Elena's books, tossing out her favorite throw pillows. It feels lighter now, she said, twirling in the empty living room. Ricardo didn't answer. He stared at the piano, silent, lid closed. He didn't know it yet, but the moment Elena walked out that door, the foundation of his world began to crack. And soon, it would crumble. Because while he celebrated his freedom, Elena was already building a different kind of power. Quiet, legal, unstoppable. And the rain that had held back all day finally began to fall, soft at first, then relentless, washing the streets clean, washing away illusions. At night, she sat on the edge of her bed, reviewing bank statements Marisol had quietly obtained. Joint accounts, mortgage records, property deeds. Every document a thread in the tapestry of betrayal and potential justice. Meanwhile, back at the hillside estate, the illusion shimmered and began to fray. Ricardo had handed Camila the deed with a flourish, convinced it was the ultimate romantic gesture. Now it's really ours, he'd said, kissing her in the foyer like they were in a movie. But Camila didn't see a home. She saw equity, leverage, a trophy. She maxed out credit cards in his name, booked weekend getaways to places he couldn't afford, hired an interior designer to erase the wife's energy from every room. When Ricardo questioned a $12,000 invoice for vibe realignment, she laughed in his face. Don't be cheap, baby. You're rich. Act like it. He wanted to argue, but he was terrified she'd leave. So he signed, again and again. One evening, as rain drummed against the windows, he found her on the terrace, Phone pressed to her ear, voice low and sharp. Yes, I told you, he's soft. Thinks love is enough. Pause. Then a laugh. No, he has no idea about the offshore account. And he won't. He's too busy playing house. Ricardo froze in the doorway, blood turning to ice. Camila turned, saw him, and didn't even flinch. She ended the call with a sigh. You really need to stop eavesdropping. Who was that? His voice cracked. Does it matter? She echoed. Words Elena had once spoken, now twisted into a weapon. He stepped forward, desperate. I gave you everything. The house, my name, my trust. She looked at him like he was a child who'd spilled milk. You gave me what you thought you could afford to lose. But darling, she tapped her manicured nail against her phone. Real power isn't given. It's taken. He reached for her arm. Don't do this. She pulled away, eyes cold. You kicked out your wife for me. Don't act surprised when I treat you the same way. That night, Ricardo lay awake in the master bed. Their bed, now hers, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time, he wondered if he'd been the fool all along. Across town, Elena sat at her tiny kitchen table, a stack of legal papers before her. Marisol had just called. They transferred the title, Marisol said over the line. But it doesn't matter. The property was acquired during the marriage with marital funds. And the assault? That changes everything. We can file for exclusive occupancy, emergency asset freeze, maybe even criminal charges. Elena's hand trembled, but not from fear, from clarity. He thinks he won, she whispered. He thinks he's safe, Marisol corrected. But safety built on lies is just a house of cards. Elena looked out her window, the city lights blurred in the rain. Somewhere out there, Ricardo was drowning in a luxury he couldn't afford, with a woman who saw him as disposable. And Camila? She was dancing on thin ice, unaware the water beneath her was already rising. Elena picked up her pen, signed the first legal motion. No fanfare, no rage, just ink on paper. But in that quiet act, the tide began to turn. Because while Ricardo slept in silk sheets, haunted by doubt, and Camila plotted her next escape, Elena was doing something far more dangerous. She was remembering her worth, and preparing to reclaim what was never truly lost, only lent to a man who didn't know how to hold it. The storm outside grew louder. Inside, Elena's resolve hardened like steel. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marisol. Court granted the emergency motion. Sheriff's Department will serve papers today. They can't sell or transfer the property. Not anymore. Elena exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the cool air. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. But she didn't smile. Not yet. Because she knew, deep in her bones, that Ricardo still didn't understand what he'd lost. And Camila? She was still playing a game she thought she controlled. At the mansion, the knock came just after noon. Ricardo opened the door in sweatpants, unshaven, eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night. Two sheriff's deputies stood on the porch, rain glistening on their hats. Mr. Ricardo Mendoza? One asked. He nodded, heart pounding. We're here to serve you with a court order filed by your wife, Elena Mendoza. The property is now under temporary exclusive occupancy by her, pending final divorce and asset division. You are not to enter without written permission. Ricardo stared at the papers like they were written in another language. But I live here. Not anymore, sir. Behind him, Camila appeared, wrapped in a silk robe, hair tousled. What is this? When Ricardo handed her the papers, her face went pale, then furious. She can't do this. The house is in my name. The court doesn't care whose name is on the deed, the deputy said flatly. Marital property, domestic violence allegation. You're both out. Camila's voice rose, sharp and panicked. This is absurd. I'll call my lawyer. You do that, the deputy said, tipping his hat. In the meantime, pack your things. You've got 2 hours. The door closed. Silence fell like a guillotine. Ricardo turned to Camila, desperation clawing at his throat. You said this was ours. You said it was safe. She whirled on him, eyes blazing. I didn't kick out my wife. You did. Don't put this on me. But you promised? I promised you passion, she snapped, yanking open drawers, throwing clothes into a suitcase. Not a lifetime of debt and legal hell. You were supposed to be rich, Ricardo. Not this. He stood there, watching the woman he'd destroyed his life for pack without a single glance back at him. No comfort, no loyalty, just cold efficiency. And in that moment, the truth hit him like a freight train. He hadn't chosen love. He'd chosen an illusion. And now both women, the one he betrayed and the one he worshipped, were walking away. That evening, Elena stood outside the mansion gates, rain misting her hair. She didn't go in. Not yet. She just watched the lights flicker on inside, shadows moving behind the windows, packing, arguing, unraveling. Her phone rang. It was Ricardo. She let it ring 3 times before answering. Elena. His voice was raw, broken. Please, just give me time. I'll fix this. You had 15 years, she said softly. You chose her in one night. I was wrong. I see that now. Do you? She paused, raindrops catching in her lashes. Or do you just see that she's leaving too? Silence on the line, then a choked sob. Elena closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to soften, to remember the man who held her hand through chemotherapy after her first miscarriage. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who traded her dignity for a fantasy. I'm not doing this to hurt you, she said, voice steady now. I'm doing it so you finally understand what you threw away. She ended the call. Inside the mansion, a lamp shattered. Camila's scream echoed through the trees. Elena turned and walked away, not in triumph but in sorrow, for the love that was, for the man he could have been. But her steps were sure, because now she wasn't just surviving, she was reclaiming, and the mansion, once a gilded cage, would soon become something else entirely. A sanctuary, a symbol, a beginning. The rain fell harder, washing the driveway clean. Ricardo sat on the edge of the unmade bed, staring at his phone. Another rejection email, another door closed. His reputation, once polished like marble, was now cracked beyond repair. Word had spread. He'd abandoned his wife after assaulting her. In their world, that wasn't just scandal. It was exile. Camila emerged from the bathroom, hair wrapped in a towel, eyes sharp with irritation. You're still on that thing? I had a meeting today, he said, voice flat. They said they couldn't move forward at this time. That's code for, we don't hire men who beat their wives. She rolled her eyes, applying lotion to her arms with mechanical precision. Stop being dramatic. You barely touched her. I shoved her into a wall. She bled. And she's using it to destroy you. Camila shot back, turning to face him. That's not justice, Ricardo. That's vengeance. No, he whispered, finally looking up. That's consequence. She froze for a second, then laughed, but it was brittle, forced. Fine, play the martyr, but don't drag me down with you. He stood, heart pounding. You said you loved me. I loved the version of you who owned a mansion and flew first class, she said, voice dropping to a razor's edge. Not this ghost. He flinched as if struck. Later that night, unable to sleep, he wandered into the dim living room. The glow of Camila's laptop lit her face. Focused, secretive. He crept closer. On the screen, a private message thread. He's broke, clingy, useless. How soon can I get out? The reply, meet me Thursday. Bring the documents. I'll wire the deposit. Ricardo's breath caught in his throat. He stepped forward. The floorboard creaked. Camila snapped the laptop shut, but not fast enough. Who are you talking to? He asked, voice trembling. She didn't pretend, didn't lie, just looked at him with cold, exhausted eyes. Someone who sees me for who I really am, not who you wish I was. You're leaving me. I'm saving myself, she corrected. You think I wanted this? Living like refugees while your ex plays saint in our house? I didn't sign up for poverty, Ricardo. I signed up for power. He sank onto the couch, hands shaking. All this time, was any of it real? She stood, walked to the window, arms crossed. Does it matter? You left your wife for a fantasy. I just played the part. He wanted to hate her, but all he felt was shame for believing her, for betraying Elena, for thinking love could be bought with square footage and designer labels. The next morning, he found her packing again, this time for good. "Where will you go?" he asked, voice hollow. "Does it matter?" She echoed Elena's words, twisted once more. He didn't stop her. Couldn't. When the door clicked shut behind her, the apartment fell into a silence so deep it roared in his ears. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, and finally let himself cry. Not for Camila, but for Elena. For the life he'd incinerated with his own hands. Outside, rain began to fall, and for the first time since he'd kicked his wife out, Ricardo understood what it meant to be truly alone. No mistress, no mansion, no mask, just a man, drenched in regret, watching the last illusion of his life dissolve in the storm. And somewhere across the city, Elena stood at the window of her small room, unaware that the woman who'd stolen her husband was already gone. But she didn't care. Inside, dust floated in shafts of pale morning light. The scent of Camila's perfume still lingered, cloying, artificial, but beneath it, Elena could almost smell the ghost of her own life. Lavender soap, old books, the faint trace of coffee from Sunday mornings long gone. She didn't linger in the foyer. She went straight to the study, the room where Ricardo used to close deals, where she once sat quietly grading papers while he paced and shouted into his phone. Now it would serve a different purpose. From her bag, she pulled a thick manila folder. Inside, bank records, property appraisals, screenshots of text messages, the police report she'd filed after the shove, and, most damning of all, the signed affidavit from the housekeeper, who'd witnessed everything. Marisol had been relentless. "We don't just want the house back, Elena," she'd said the night before, eyes gleaming over steaming coffee. "We want to make sure he can never profit from what he destroyed." Elena sat at Ricardo's old desk, her desk now, and opened her laptop. She logged into the secure portal Marisol had set up. One click, and the final legal motion was filed. A petition for sole ownership based on dissipation of marital assets, emotional abuse, and documented acts of domestic violence. As the screen confirmed submission, her phone buzzed. It was Ricardo. She stared at his name flashing on the screen. Her finger hovered. Then she answered. "Elena." His voice was raw, stripped bare. "I don't know where she went. She left last night. Took everything." Elena didn't respond right away. She walked to the window, looked out at the garden where they'd once planted roses together. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Not for him, but for the truth. But your problems aren't my responsibility anymore." "You don't understand," he pleaded. "I'm being sued. Creditors are calling. I can't get a job. I have nowhere to go. And whose fault is that?" Her voice was calm, but edged with steel. "You chose her over me. You chose illusion over truth. You chose to push me into a wall and walk away like I was nothing. I was wrong," he whispered, voice breaking. "God, Elena, I was so wrong." She closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, she saw the man who held her hand in the hospital after her second miscarriage. The man who whispered, "I'll always protect you," on their wedding night. But that man had vanished the moment he let Camila into their bed. "I believe you're sorry," she said softly, "but sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't erase blood on a lip. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I spent loving a shadow." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Then, quietly, "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied, "except to never contact me again unless it's through your lawyer." She ended the call. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Elena turned back to the desk. She opened the bottom drawer, Ricardo's private compartment, and found what she expected, a hidden ledger. Not just personal expenses, but transfers to offshore accounts, fake invoices, payments to Camila disguised as consulting fees. She photographed every page. Then she emailed them to Marisol with one line. "He didn't just betray me, he defrauded our marriage." Marisol replied instantly, "This changes everything. We can go after him criminally. Tax evasion, fraud, asset hiding. He's not just losing the house, Elena. He's losing his freedom." Elena stared at the words on the screen. Part of her wanted to say yes, to watch him fall completely. But another part, the part that had survived, that had risen, knew true power wasn't in destruction. It was in choice. She typed back, "Let's secure the house first. The rest, we'll see." Because Elena wasn't building a prison for Ricardo. She was building a sanctuary for women like her. And the mansion, once a symbol of his arrogance, would soon echo with the voices of survivors, not secrets. As she walked out of the study, she passed the grand staircase. At the top, she paused, hand on the banister. She could almost hear Camila's laughter fading into silence, and Ricardo's footsteps, once commanding, now lost. But soon, new sounds would fill these halls. Tears turned to strength, whispers turned to courage, silence turned to song. Elena descended the stairs slowly, keys in hand, not to lock anyone out, but to open the door for herself and for all the women who'd been told that he stood outside the towering glass doors of his former office building, staring up at the floor where his corner suite once overlooked the skyline. A security guard recognized him and shook his head. "Sorry, Mr. Mendoza, you're not cleared to enter." Ricardo didn't argue. He just turned away, shoulders slumped, and walked. His feet carried him, almost by instinct, back toward the hillside, toward the mansion. He told himself he just needed to see it, to remember what he'd lost. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was hoping she might see him, might take pity, might offer a lifeline. He stopped at the iron gates. They were locked now, a discreet security panel installed where the old keypad used to be. Through the bars, he saw movement, workers carrying furniture, painters in white overalls, women in simple clothes unloading boxes from a van. One of them turned. It was Elena. She wore jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose, no makeup. She looked lighter, stronger, like she'd shed not just a marriage, but the weight of pretending. Their eyes met across the distance. Ricardo's throat tightened. He took a step forward. "Elena!" She didn't flinch, didn't run, just walked slowly toward the gate, stopping just on the other side. "You look terrible," she said, voice quiet but clear. "I've been better," he admitted, voice cracking. I lost everything." "You threw everything away," she corrected gently. "There's a difference." He swallowed hard. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I don't have anywhere else to go." She studied him. The hollows under his eyes, the tremor in his hands, the shame radiating off him like heat. For a moment, something flickered in her gaze. Not love, not even pity, but recognition. "You hurt me," she said softly, "deeply, and you chose someone who never loved you. That's your pain to carry." "I know," he whispered, "but that doesn't mean I want you to starve," she added. His breath hitched. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded bill. Just one $20 note. She held it through the bars. He stared at it. Not enough for a hotel, barely enough for a meal, but it was more than anyone else had offered. "I'm not giving you this because I owe you," she said, voice firm now. "I'm giving it because I refuse to become the kind of person who watches someone suffer in silence. Even you." He took the bill, fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. Her skin was warm, real. "Thank you," he choked out. She nodded once, then turned to go. "Elena," he called after her, desperate. "What are you doing with the house?" She paused, looked back. Sunlight caught in her eyes. "I'm turning it into a shelter," she said, "for women who've been told they're nothing, who've been pushed, lied to, erased." She held his gaze. "Women like I was." He felt the words like a blade between his ribs. "You're using my home to help them?" "No," she said. stepping closer again, voice low and steady. "I'm using our home, the one I helped build, the one you tried to steal, to give them what you took from me: safety, dignity, a second chance." He had no answer, only shame. She turned and walked back toward the house, where a group of women waited, some with children, some with scars visible, others hidden. They greeted her with smiles, with hugs, with trust. Ricardo stood there, $20 in his palm, watching the life he destroyed become someone else's salvation. And for the first time, he understood. Elena wasn't just surviving. She was healing the world he'd broken. He walked away slowly, the bill clutched tight, not toward a restaurant or a hotel, but toward a soup kitchen he'd passed days before. Maybe they'd let him wash dishes. Maybe they'd let him sit. He didn't deserve more. Back at the mansion, Elena watched him disappear down the hill. A small figure, but Ricardo hadn't vanished. He'd been watching, from a bench across the street, from the bus stop down the hill, always at a distance, always in the shadows. He told himself he was just making sure she was safe, but the truth was uglier. He was hoping, against all reason, that she might look out a window and see him, that she might soften. One rainy afternoon, he finally crossed the line. Drenched and shivering, he approached the front gate just as a delivery van pulled away. Before the security guard could react, Ricardo slipped through, fast, desperate, and ran toward the side entrance, the one that used to lead to the staff quarters. He pounded on the door. Inside, Elena was helping a young woman named Lila fill out housing assistance forms. The knock startled them both. "Don't open it," Lila whispered, eyes wide. It could be him. Elena's pulse spiked, but she stood. "Stay here." She walked to the door, peered through the peephole, and saw him, soaked, hollow-eyed, trembling. She unlocked the door just enough to speak through the crack. "What are you doing here, Ricardo? I need to talk to you," he said, voice raw. "Please. You're not allowed on this property. You know that." "I'm not asking for the house," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything. I heard Camila's gone, really gone, and I found something in her things before she left." Elena hesitated. Rain dripped from his hair onto the stone step. "What is it?" He reached into his coat, slowly, so as not to frighten her, and pulled out a small USB drive, sealed in a plastic bag. "She was working with someone," he said. "Someone who knew about our finances, about the offshore accounts. She was going to sell everything, your name, my name, the company records, to a private buyer. I stopped her, but I think she already sent copies." Elena's blood ran cold. If those documents got out, especially the falsified ones Ricardo had signed under Camila's influence, it could drag Elena into legal chaos, even criminal investigation. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, voice tight. "Because it's your life too," he said, eyes glistening. "And because maybe this is the only way I can undo even a fraction of what I did." She studied him. The arrogance was gone, the entitlement shattered. What remained was something fragile. Remorse, yes, but also a strange, broken honesty. She opened the door wider, just enough to take the USB. "Wait here," she said. She returned minutes later with Marisol on speakerphone, voice sharp with urgency. "Elena, if this data is real, we need to file an emergency injunction today. This could be catastrophic." Elena looked at Ricardo, still standing in the rain. "Did you keep a copy?" "No," he said immediately. "I swear, I deleted everything on my end. This is the only one." She believed him. "Go," she said softly, "and don't come back unless it's an emergency. This isn't your home anymore." He nodded, shoulders slumping in relief, or maybe surrender. But as he turned to leave, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Two men in dark suits stepped out. Ricardo froze. One of them called out, voice cold, "Mr. Mendoza, we've been looking for you." Elena's breath caught. "Who are they?" Ricardo's face went pale. "Creditors. The ones I couldn't pay." The men approached, one holding a thick envelope. "You're being served with a civil suit for fraud and asset concealment." You're also in violation of a court-ordered asset freeze. Elena stepped forward instinctively. He's not living here. He has no assets. He signed guarantees, the man said flatly. And your name, Ms. Mendoza, appears on several joint liabilities. We'll be contacting your counsel. Her stomach dropped. Ricardo looked at her, horrified. I never thought they'd come after you. It's okay, she said, though it wasn't. Just go. The men escorted Ricardo to the car. He didn't resist. As they drove off, he pressed his hand to the window, a silent apology. Elena stood in the doorway, rain soaking her sleeves, the USB drive clenched in her fist. Inside, Lila appeared behind her. Are you all right? Elena took a deep breath. I will be, because she knew now. Ricardo's chaos wasn't done with her yet, but neither was she. That night, she sat with Marisol reviewing the files on the USB. Hidden transfers, fake shell companies, Camila's notes, target, Elena. Make her look complicit, then disappear. Camila hadn't just wanted the mansion. She'd wanted to destroy Elena completely. And Ricardo, he'd been her pawn, and now her loose end. But Elena wasn't a victim anymore. She picked up the phone. File the motion tomorrow. Full financial disclosure. Public record. Let the world see who really betrayed whom. Outside, thunder rolled. The storm wasn't over. He'd been released after hours of questioning. No arrest, but a warning. If he couldn't settle the debts, they'd pursue criminal fraud charges. And worse, Elena's name was now tangled in the mess. He'd dragged her into the mud even after swearing he wouldn't. He wrapped his arms around himself, teeth chattering, watching rainwater pool around his feet. The bench was slick, the wood splintered. A street lamp flickered above him, casting jagged shadows. He thought of the mansion's warm fireplaces, the soft carpets, the bed where he'd once slept without a care in the world. Now he had nowhere to go. The shelter had turned him away. No men, they'd said. His old friends, silent. His family, ashamed. Even the flophouse wouldn't take him without cash up front. He closed his eyes. For the first time, he truly understood what Elena must have felt that night he threw her out. Invisible, disposable, unwanted. A flash of lightning lit the park in stark white, and in that instant, he saw his reflection in a rain-slicked trash can. Hollow cheeks, wild eyes, hair plastered to his forehead. Not a CEO, not a husband, just a man who'd gambled everything on a lie and lost. Then, through the downpour, footsteps. He looked up. A woman stood a few feet away, holding an umbrella. Not Elena. An older woman with kind eyes and a worn coat. A volunteer from the downtown outreach program. You can't stay here, she said gently. You'll get pneumonia. I have nowhere else, he muttered, voice hoarse. She studied him, not with judgment, but with quiet recognition. You're Ricardo Mendoza. He flinched. Yeah, and everyone knows what I did. She didn't deny it. Come on. We have cots at the St. Bridget Center. Just for tonight. He hesitated. Pride still clung to him like wet cloth. But then another wave of shivers racked his body, and he nodded. At the shelter, he was given dry clothes, a thin blanket, and a cup of broth. He sat on the edge of a cot in a room full of strangers. Men who'd lost jobs, families, hope. No one spoke to him. No one needed to. Their silence said it all. You're one of us now. Later that night, feverish and exhausted, he dreamed. He saw Elena standing in the mansion's grand hall, not in a dress, but in simple clothes, holding the hand of a young girl with bruises on her arms. Behind them, other women, dozens, smiling, safe, strong. And then he saw himself, small and distant, standing in the rain outside the gates, watching through the bars like a ghost. He woke with a gasp, sweat mixing with rain still clinging to his skin. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside him something shifted. Not hope, not yet, but clarity. He hadn't just lost a house. He'd lost the right to stand in the light. And maybe that was exactly what he deserved. Back at the mansion, Elena stood at her bedroom window, her bedroom now painted soft blue, filled with books and plants. She watched the storm too, arms crossed, heart heavy. Marisol had called an hour ago. The creditors are backing off for now, but Ricardo's name is toxic. If he doesn't disappear completely, they'll keep dragging you into it. Elena had said nothing, but she'd thought of him out there in the rain. She didn't love him, not anymore, but she remembered the man he once was. The one who cried when their dog died, who sang off-key in the shower, who held her when she couldn't sleep after her mother's funeral. That man was buried under layers of ego and betrayal. But maybe, just maybe, the rain could wash him clean. She turned from the window, walked to her desk, and opened a drawer. Inside was a list, names of shelters, legal aid contacts, rehab programs for men who'd been abusers. She picked up her pen and added St. Bridget's to the list. Not for him, for the women who might one day need to know that even monsters could change. Outside, thunder rolled again, deep, final. She opened a small wooden box she hadn't touched in months. Inside, photographs. Not the staged portraits from galas or vacations, but the quiet ones. The real ones. There he was, Ricardo, younger, softer, kneeling in the garden, planting tulips with dirt on his hands, grinning at the camera like he hadn't a care in the world. There they were, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, her head on his shoulder, both asleep during a movie. And this one, taken in the hospital just hours after her first miscarriage. His eyes were red, his arm tight around her, his face pressed into her hair like he was trying to absorb her pain into himself. Her fingers trembled as she traced his face in the photo. "You were good once," she whispered. "Not perfect, never perfect, but good, kind, present. A man who remembered her favorite flower, who made coffee just the way she liked it, who held her when the world felt too heavy." Then came the slow erosion, the late nights that turned into lies, the distance that turned into contempt, the love that turned into ownership. She closed her eyes, and the memories surged like waves. "You're overreacting," he'd said the first time she asked about the texts. "You're lucky I even come home," he muttered during their last dinner before the party. "Don't make this about you," he snapped when she cried after finding Camila's lipstick on his collar. Each word a brick in the wall he built between them. And then the shove, the blood, the silence that followed. She opened her eyes, set the photo down gently, and wiped a single tear from her cheek. Not for the man he became, but for the man he could have been, if he'd chosen courage over comfort, loyalty over lust, truth over illusion. Downstairs, the shelter buzzed with life. Laughter from the kitchen, a child's giggle, the soft murmur of women sharing stories in the sunroom. That was her present, her purpose. But the past? It wasn't a cage anymore. It was a lesson. Later that evening, as she walked through the garden, now filled with wildflowers and benches for quiet reflection, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something instinct maybe made her press accept. "Elena." His voice was barely a whisper. "Ricardo." She didn't speak, just waited. I saw the photos online," he said. "Of the shelter, of you with the women. You turned it into something beautiful." She closed her eyes. "It was always beautiful. You just stopped seeing it." Pause. Rain began to fall again, soft this time. "I keep dreaming about that night," he said, voice cracking. "The night I pushed you. I see your face, the blood, the way you looked at me, not with hate, but with disappointment. Like I'd failed you in a way I could never fix." "You did," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean you can't try to be better." "I don't know how." "Start by admitting you were wrong. Not just to me, to yourself." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the patter of rain on leaves. "I miss you," he finally said, not as a plea but as a confession. "I miss who you were," she replied. "But that man chose to disappear, and I can't bring him back." She ended the call, not with anger, not with closure, but with truth. Back in the library, she placed the photos back in the box but left one out, the hospital picture. the one where he held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. She pinned it to the wall above her desk, not as a reminder of love, but as a warning. Even the kindest hearts can harden, and a hope. Even the hardest hearts can soften again. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and somewhere in the city, Ricardo stood under an awning, phone still in hand, staring at the sky, no longer begging for forgiveness, but finally beginning to understand what it meant to earn it. Weeks, sometimes days, they began to stand taller, speak louder, breathe deeper. Elena moved among them not as a savior, but as a sister. She remembered what it felt like to be erased, and so she made sure every woman who walked through those doors was seen. One afternoon, as she helped paint the new nursery, soft yellow walls, tiny handprints already drying in the corners, a young woman named Sophia approached, clutching a folded piece of paper. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Sophia hesitated, then unfolded the paper. It was a flyer for a city-funded program, Men's Accountability and Recovery Circle, for those seeking to change after patterns of control or violence. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "My ex, he called me last night, said he's in this program, that he's changing." She looked up, eyes glistening. "Do you think people like that can really change?" Elena set down her paintbrush. The scent of fresh paint hung in the air, clean and hopeful. "I used to think change was a grand gesture," she said slowly. "A dramatic apology, a grand return. But real change, it's quiet. It's showing up when no one's watching. It's accepting consequences without demanding forgiveness. It's choosing every single day to be better, even when no one believes you can be." Sophia swallowed. "But how do you know if it's real?" Elena looked out the window, where the garden bloomed with resilience. "You don't, not at first, but you watch, you protect yourself. And if they truly change, you'll see it in their actions, not their words." Later that evening, as Elena reviewed grant applications in the study, her phone buzzed. A text from Marisol. He enrolled. "Ricardo, in the accountability program. Started today." Elena's breath caught. She didn't reply, just set the phone down and walked to the window. The city lights shimmered below, distant and indifferent. That night, across town, Ricardo sat in a circle of folding chairs in a church basement. The room smelled of stale coffee and old carpet. Men sat with their heads bowed, some angry, some ashamed, some numb. A facilitator, a former inmate turned counselor named Marcus, spoke gently. "This isn't about excuses. It's about responsibility. If you're here to prove you're not a monster, leave. If you're here to face the monster you've been, stay." Ricardo kept his eyes on the floor. When it was his turn, his voice was barely audible. "I told myself I loved her, but I treated her like she owed me, like her love was a debt I was owed just for showing up." He paused, throat tight. "I pushed her, once, and that one time, it wasn't about anger. It was about control. And I've spent every day since wishing I could take it back." No one clapped. No one praised him. But Marcus nodded. "Good. Now you start the work." After the session, Ricardo stood in the rain again. But this time, he didn't feel punished by it. He felt cleansed. He didn't call Elena, didn't text, didn't show up at the gate. He just showed up for himself. Back at the mansion, Elena stood in the library, the hospital photo still pinned to the wall. She picked up her phone, stared at Marisol's message for a long moment, then typed a single line. "Keep me updated." Not for him, for the women who might ask. Because she knew now, her healing wasn't tied to his redemption. But if his change was real, if it could stop even one woman from walking the path she'd walked, then it mattered. And so, in the quiet hum of the shelter, surrounded by women rebuilding their lives, Elena made a silent vow. She would never again let a man's regret define her worth, but she would honor truth wherever it led, even if it rained for 100 more nights, even if he never stood in the light again. Elena stood at the front gate, checking the delivery schedule for donated bedding, when she saw him. "Ricardo, Not lurking, not desperate, just there, standing a respectful distance away, wearing clean but worn clothes, hands tucked in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cool breeze. He looked thinner, older. His eyes, once sharp with entitlement, now held a quiet gravity. Her pulse quickened, but not with fear. With caution, she walked toward the gate, stopping just inside the iron bars. "You're not supposed to be here." "I know," he said softly. "I didn't come for you. I came for help." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He shifted, glancing toward the shelter's entrance, where a group of women were helping unload groceries. "I heard you take in anyone in need, even men, sometimes, for meals or referrals." He swallowed. "I'm not asking to stay. I haven't eaten in 2 days, and I didn't want to go to a soup kitchen where I might be recognized. Not after everything." Elena studied him. This wasn't the Ricardo who once commanded boardrooms. This was a man stripped bare. No pride, no performance, just raw, trembling need. She could say no, and part of her wanted to let him feel the full weight of the world he'd built. But then she remembered Sophia's question, "Can people really change?" And she remembered her own answer, "You watch, you protect yourself, and if they truly change, you'll see it in their actions." She opened the gate just enough. "Come in," she said, "but only to the side kitchen, and you sit alone." He nodded, eyes wide with something like gratitude. "Thank you." Inside, she led him through the service corridor, away from the main halls, to the small staff kitchen where volunteers prepared meals. She gestured to a stool at the counter. "Sit." She didn't speak as she ladled steaming vegetable stew into a bowl, added a slice of fresh bread, set it before him. He stared at it like it was gold. "I don't expect anything," he said quietly, not touching the food yet. "Not forgiveness, not conversation, just, this is enough." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Why now? Why here?" He looked up, and for the first time, she saw tears in his eyes. Not manipulative, not performative, but real. "Because I finally understand what I took from you. It wasn't just a home. It was your safety, your voice, your belief that love shouldn't hurt." He paused, voice breaking. "And I gave that to someone who never deserved it." Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to stay cold, but his words rang with a truth she hadn't heard before. "You're in the program," she said, not a question. 6 weeks in, he nodded. "It's hard. Every day I have to face what I did. Not just to you, but to the man I thought I was." She watched as he finally picked up the spoon. His hands shook slightly. They sat in silence as he ate. The only sound, the soft clink of metal on ceramic. Outside, birds sang. A child laughed. Then, from the hallway, footsteps. Elena turned and saw Sophia, holding a basket of laundry, frozen in the doorway. Her eyes locked onto Ricardo, and her face went pale. Elena stepped between them. "It's okay. He's just here for a meal. He's leaving." Sophia didn't move. "Is that him? The one from the photos?" Ricardo set his spoon down slowly. Without being asked, he stood. "I'll go." "No," Elena said firmly. Then to Sophia, "He's not a threat. Not anymore." Sophia took a shaky breath. "How do you know?" Elena looked at Ricardo, not with love, not with pity, but with clear-eyed assessment. "Because he didn't ask for more than soup. And he sat with his shame instead of running from it." Ricardo met her gaze. "I don't deserve your trust, but I'm trying to earn the right to exist in the same world as you without making it harder for you." Elena nodded once. "Finish your meal, then go out the service gate. Don't come back unless you're referred through the outreach program." He sat again, finished the stew in silence, then stood, placed the bowl carefully in the sink, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned. "Thank you for seeing me as human, even when I wasn't." She didn't reply, but as he disappeared down the alley, Sophia stepped closer, voice trembling. "Do you think he's really changing?" Elena watched the empty doorway where he'd stood. "I don't know, but today he chose humility over hunger. That's a start. Later that night, alone in her room, Elena sat by the window, the city lights twinkling below. She thought of the way he'd eaten, not greedily but gratefully. The way he'd looked at Sophia, not with defensiveness, but with sorrow. Maybe change wasn't a single act. Maybe it was 1,000 small choices. And tonight, Ricardo had made one. Not for her, but for himself. And somehow that mattered more. And then, one humid afternoon, Marcus, the facilitator from the men's accountability program, called. "He wants to speak," Marcus said, voice measured. "Not to you, to the group, at the shelter, if you'll allow it." Elena's breath caught. "Why?" "He says he needs to say it where it matters, where the harm was done." She hesitated, letting him back inside, even for 5 minutes. Felt like reopening a wound she'd finally stitched shut. But she remembered Sophia's eyes, remembered the young woman who'd asked, "Can people really change?" And she remembered her own answer. "You watch." "Fine," she said. "One time, 10 minutes. No audience except the women who choose to stay. And you're there the whole time." The day arrived under a sky heavy with unshed rain. The sunroom was arranged in a circle of chairs, some empty, some filled with women who'd heard the rumors, who carried their own scars from men like Ricardo. Sophia sat near the front, hands clasped tight. Elena stood by the window, arms crossed, heart pounding. Then he walked in, clean-shaven, wearing a simple button-down, no tie. His eyes scanned the room, not with arrogance, but with humility so deep it bordered on pain. He didn't look at Elena. He looked at the floor. Marcus gestured to the center chair. "Whenever you're ready." Ricardo sat, swallowed, then spoke, voice low, steady, trembling only once. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he began. "I don't deserve it. I'm here because for years, I told myself I was a good man who made a few mistakes. But I wasn't. I was a man who used love as a weapon, who confused control for care, who believed my wife's silence meant consent." A woman in the back shifted. Someone sniffled. "I pushed Elena," he said, the words raw. "Not because I was angry, because I wanted her to remember who was in charge. And that one act, it wasn't an accident. It was the truth finally showing." Elena's throat tightened. She didn't look at him. She watched the women. Some crying, some nodding, some staring at him like they were seeing their own abusers in his face. "I left her for a woman who saw me as a stepping stone," he continued. "And when she abandoned me, I had no one to blame but myself. But even then, I didn't understand. Not really. Not until I sat in that circle of men and heard stories just like mine, and realized I wasn't special. I was just another man who thought his pain gave him the right to hurt someone softer." He paused, hands gripping his knees. "I used to think strength was taking what you wanted, but real strength is facing what you've broken, and trying every damn day to stop breaking it more." Silence filled the room, thick, heavy, sacred. Then, from the back, a woman stood. Older, gray hair pulled back, eyes sharp with decades of survival. "Did you ever apologize to her?" she asked, voice like gravel. Ricardo looked at Elena for the first time, not pleading, just seeing her. "I tried," he said softly, "but words aren't enough, so I stopped asking. I just try to be different." The woman nodded slowly. "Good. Words are cheap. Actions are currency." He gave a small, broken smile. "I'm learning that." Marcus stood. "Thank you, Ricardo." As he rose to leave, Sophia spoke. Quiet, but clear. "Do you ever dream about her?" He turned. "Every night." "What do you see?" He closed his eyes. "Her walking away. And me." Finally understanding why. Sophia wiped her cheek. "That's how I knew my ex would never change. He never even saw me leaving. He just kept pulling me back." Ricardo nodded. "I see her now, and that's the first real thing I've done in years." He walked out without looking back. Elena stayed by the window, watching him disappear down the drive. No grand gesture, no plea, just truth spoken in the place it was needed most. Later, as the women gathered for tea, Sophia came to her side. "He meant it," she said. Elena sipped her tea, warm and bitter. "Maybe, but it's not about him anymore." "No," Sophia agreed. "It's about us knowing we're not crazy. That what happened wasn't love." Elena looked out at the garden, where new flowers bloomed where old roots had rotted. And for the first time, she didn't feel haunted by the past. She felt witnessed, because Ricardo hadn't come to beg. He'd come to bear witness to his own failure. And in doing so, he'd given these women something rare, proof that even the worst truths can be spoken, and that speaking them is the first step toward freedom. Outside, the long-awaited rain finally began to fall, gentle, cleansing. Full of the key was small, tarnished, the kind that opened an old desk drawer or a forgotten lockbox. The note read, "This opens the safe behind the study bookshelf, the one you never knew existed. Everything in it is yours, not as repayment, as truth." Her hands trembled as she turned the key over in her palm. She hadn't been back to the study's hidden safe since the early days of the divorce, when she'd taken only the marriage certificate and left the rest, too raw, too tangled with his secrets. But now she needed to know. That evening, after the last volunteer had left and the shelter settled into quiet, she walked alone to the study. Moonlight spilled through the windows, silvering the dust on the bookshelves. She pressed the hidden latch behind the third shelf from the left, the one that held his old law textbooks, and the panel swung open with a soft click. Inside the safe, a stack of documents, a velvet jewelry box, and a sealed manila envelope labeled, "For Elena, if I'm gone." She opened the envelope first. Inside were bank statements, her name on accounts she never knew existed, transfers from the early years of their marriage, deposits she'd made from her teaching salary before he'd insisted she focus on the home. He'd kept them, hidden them, preserved them like relics. Beneath them, a letter. "You always said I took everything from you, but I didn't. You gave me your trust, your time, your silence, and I wasted it. But your money, your independence, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Felt like stealing your future. So I locked it away, hoping one day I'd be worthy of giving it back. I'm not, but you are. Use it to help them, the women, the ones I failed by failing you. And Elena, I'm sorry I made you doubt your own worth. You were always enough. I was just too broken to see it." Tears blurred her vision, not tears of sadness, but of release. She opened the jewelry box. Inside wasn't the diamond necklace he'd given her on their anniversary. It was her mother's locket, the one she'd thought lost during the move after the separation. Engraved on the back, in his handwriting, "She never stopped loving you. Don't let me make you forget." A knock at the study door startled her. It was Sophia holding 2 mugs of tea. "You've been in here a while. Everything okay?" Elena quickly wiped her eyes, but Sophia saw. She stepped inside, set the mugs down, and noticed the open safe. "He sent you something," she said softly. Elena nodded, handing her the letter. Sophia read it in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "He's really doing it, isn't he? Not for you. For himself." "Yes," Elena whispered, "and that's what makes it real." The next morning, Elena met with Marisol over coffee in the sunroom. "He's petitioning the court to formally relinquish all claims to the property," Marisol said, flipping through papers. "And he's transferring the remaining marital assets, what's left after creditors, to a trust in your name, earmarked for the shelter." Elena stared into her cup. "He doesn't have to do this." "No," Marisol agreed, "but he is. And legally, it strengthens your position. No more loopholes. No more threats." Elena thought of the key, the locket, the letter. Not grand gestures, quiet reckonings. Later that week, she stood at the shelter's front gate as a city van pulled up. Ricardo stepped out, not in a suit, but in work clothes holding a toolbox. He'd been hired as a part-time maintenance worker through the outreach program. Minimum wage, no privileges, just labor. Their eyes met across the driveway. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just nodded. He returned the nod, then walked toward the side entrance. Head down, shoulders straight, ready to work. Inside, Sophia watched from the window. "Do you think he'll stay?" Elena sipped her tea. "I don't know. But if he does, it won't be for me." "No," Sophia said softly. "It'll be because he finally learned how to stand on his own." And as Ricardo disappeared into the service corridor, fixing a leaky faucet, repairing a broken step, doing the quiet work of atonement, Elena felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but peace. Because the man who once owned everything now asked for nothing. And the woman he discarded? She had built a world where broken things could be mended. Not erased, not forgotten, but transformed. And in that world, even he might find a place. Not as a husband, not as a hero, but Ricardo still came every Tuesday and Thursday, early before sunrise, carrying his worn toolbox, fixing what was broken. A loose banister, a dripping faucet, the old piano's sticky key. He never entered the main living areas unless asked. Never lingered. Never spoke unless spoken to. But the women had begun to nod when he passed. Some even said good morning. He lived in a single-room apartment above a laundromat, worked part-time cleaning offices at night, and attended every session of the accountability program without fail. He hadn't missed one in 14 months. One crisp morning, as he repaired a shutter on the east wing, Sophia approached with 2 paper cups of coffee. "Black, right?" she asked, holding one out. He hesitated, then took it. "Yeah, thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, watching leaves drift down onto the garden path. "You know," she said softly, "my ex showed up last week, said he'd changed, wanted me back." Ricardo didn't look at her. "What did you say?" I asked him if he'd ever sat in a room full of women he hurt and just listened, without defending himself, without saying, "But I loved you." She sipped her coffee. He got angry, said I was cruel. Ricardo finally met her eyes. "You weren't cruel. You were clear." She nodded. "Clarity is the first gift we give ourselves." He looked down at his hands, calloused now, stained with paint and grease. "I used to think love was possession, that if I gave her everything, house, money, status, she owed me obedience." He let out a breath, shaky with regret. "But love isn't a transaction, it's a promise. And I broke mine before I even knew I'd made it." Sophia studied him. "Do you miss her?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "I miss who I was when I was with her, the man she believed I could be." He paused. But that man didn't exist yet, and she waited too long for him to show up. Inside the mansion, Elena watched them from the library window. She saw the way Ricardo held his coffee like it was something precious. The way he listened, really listened when Sophia spoke. Not to respond, just to understand. Later that day, as she sorted mail in the office, Marcus called. "He's ready," Marcus said, "for the final step." "What is it?" "The public acknowledgement. In court, he wants to formally state on record that his actions constituted domestic violence, that there's no excuse, no justification. It'll close the legal door on any future claims he might make, and it'll protect other women if his name ever comes up in their cases." Elena's chest tightened. "He doesn't have to do that." "No," Marcus agreed, "but he says it's the only way to make sure his silence doesn't hurt anyone else." The hearing was set for Friday. That morning, Ricardo arrived at the shelter not in work clothes, but in a clean, slightly too big suit. Thrift store, but pressed. He didn't go inside, just stood by the gate, waiting. Elena walked out to meet him. "You don't need to do this for me," she said. "I'm not," he replied, voice steady. "I'm doing it for the truth." She studied his face, the lines around his eyes deeper now, his gaze calm, no longer searching for approval. "You've changed." "Not enough," he said, "but I'm trying." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the locket, her mother's. She'd worn it every day since he returned it. "I kept it," she said, "not because I forgot what you did, but because I finally remembered who I am." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You were always the strongest one in the room." They walked to the courthouse in silence, side by side but not touching. When they arrived, Reporters lingered, drawn by whispers of a fallen CEO's public reckoning. Cameras flashed. Ricardo didn't flinch. Inside, before the judge, he stood without a lawyer. Read his statement clearly, without hesitation. I used emotional manipulation, financial control, and physical force to dominate my wife. I justified it as passion, as stress, as love. It was none of those things. It was abuse, and I take full responsibility. I ask for no leniency, only the chance to ensure my actions are never minimized or repeated. The courtroom was silent. Elena sat in the back, tears streaming silently down her face. Not for the man he was, but for the women who would hear this and know, it wasn't your fault. Afterward, outside, the reporters swarmed. Ricardo turned to Elena. "Will you walk back with me?" She hesitated, then took his arm, not as a wife, but as a witness. As they passed the cameras, she spoke, loud enough for them to hear. "He didn't do this to win me back. He did it because it was right." And in that moment, the mansion behind them, once a symbol of power and betrayal, stood tall not as his legacy, but as hers. A sanctuary, promise, a beginning. Elena sat on the front steps, a mug of tea warming her hands, watching the world she'd rebuilt. The shelter had expanded, 2 more wings renovated, a counseling center added, a small garden where women grew vegetables and hope side by side. Grants had poured in after Ricardo's court statement went viral. Not a scandal, but as rare, raw accountability. Donors called it courage. Elena called it consequence. And then she saw him. Ricardo walked up the driveway, not in work clothes, not in his thrift store suit, but in simple jeans and a worn sweater, carrying a small potted sapling. He stopped a few feet away, hesitant. "You don't have to be here," she said gently. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to see it, with my own eyes, what it's become." She gestured to the bench beside her. He sat, careful not to crowd her space. They watched a little girl chase a butterfly across the lawn, her mother calling after her with a smile. "It's beautiful," he said, voice thick. "You turned our cage into a home for others." "Our cage," she echoed softly. "Yes, but it was only a cage because you made it one." He nodded. "I did." Silence settled between them, not heavy, but honest. He set the sapling on the step between them. "It's a Japanese maple. They say it takes years to grow, but once it does, it shelters generations." He looked at her. "I planted one where I live, but this one, I wanted it here, if you'll have it." She studied the tiny tree, fragile, green, full of potential. "Why?" "Because I can't undo what I did," he said. "But maybe something good can still grow from the ground I poisoned." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to the edge of the garden, where the old rose bushes had been replaced with herbs and wildflowers. She pointed to a bare patch near the stone path. "Plant it there," she said. He did, kneeling in the soil, hands working gently, reverently. When he was done, he brushed the dirt from his palms and stood. "You own the mansion," he said, looking at the grand facade. "Not because you took it, but because you gave it meaning." "And the mistress?" she asked, almost to herself. "Gone without a trace." "She left the country," he said. "Heard she's living under a new name in Lisbon. Still chasing money, I guess." "And you?" she asked, turning to him. "Where do you sleep now?" "In a room with a roof," he said simply, "and a window that opens. That's enough." She looked at him, really looked. The arrogance was gone. The hunger for validation vanished. What remained was quiet dignity, earned through humility, not granted by wealth. "You're not the man who kicked his wife out," she said. "No," he agreed. "I'm the man who finally learned what it means to come back. Not to take, but to tend." A breeze stirred the leaves of the newly planted sapling. Inside the mansion, a woman sang softly while folding laundry. A baby cried, then laughed. Life unbroken, moving forward. Elena turned toward the house. "You can visit, on volunteer days, if you keep showing up the way you have." He didn't smile, didn't thank her, just nodded as if accepting a sacred trust. Because the truth was clear now, the title had never been just about property. He kicked his wife for mistress. Now wife owns mansion, mistress is gone, he sleeps in the rain. But the rain wasn't punishment anymore. It was purification. The mansion wasn't a trophy. It was testimony. And he wasn't a king in exile. He was a man learning to walk in the light, barefoot, humbled, finally free. As he turned to leave, Elena called after him, "Ricardo." He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for finally seeing me." He looked back, eyes glistening. "No, thank you for letting me see myself." And with that, he walked down the driveway, not toward ruin, but toward repair. Behind him, the mansion stood tall, no longer a monument to betrayal, but Elena stood by the grand fireplace, the same one where Ricardo once toasted his promotions. Now surrounded by children building gingerbread houses and elders knitting tiny hats for newborns. She watched them, heart full, when Sophia approached, holding 2 mugs of spiced cider. "He's outside," Sophia said softly. Elena didn't ask who. She already knew. She walked to the front door, opened it slowly. Ricardo stood on the porch, shoulders dusted with snow, hands tucked in his coat pockets. He wasn't shivering, just waiting. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to see the lights." She followed his gaze. The mansion was strung with soft white bulbs, twinkling along the eaves, wrapped around the columns, glowing in the frosted garden. It looked like a lighthouse in the night. They stood in silence for a long moment, breath curling in the cold air. "I got a job," he said finally, "full-time, at the community center, teaching financial literacy to men in recovery." They said, "They heard about what I did, and they still gave me a chance." She looked at him. "Because you earned it." He nodded. "I live in a small apartment now. 1 room, but it's mine. Cook my own meals, pay my own bills. No one owes me anything." He paused. "And for the first time, I don't feel empty." She smiled just a little. "That's not emptiness you felt before. It was guilt wearing the mask of ambition." He let out a quiet laugh. "You always saw through me." "Not always," she said, "but I see you now." Inside, a child began singing Silent Night, voice clear and sweet. The others joined in, soft at first, then stronger. Ricardo listened, eyes closed. When the song ended, he turned to her. "I don't expect anything from you, Elena. Not forgiveness, not friendship, not even a second chance." He met her gaze, steady and clear. "But I needed you to know. I'm not that man anymore. Not because I want you back, but because you deserved better than what I gave you. And I needed to become someone who understands that." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from release. The last knot inside her loosened. She reached into her coat and pulled out the locket, her mother's. She'd worn it every day since he returned it. "I kept this," she said, "not because I forgot the pain, but because I finally remembered my worth wasn't tied to your choices." He nodded, throat tight. "You were always whole. I was just too broken to see it." She stepped back toward the door. "Merry Christmas, Ricardo." He smiled, small, genuine. "Merry Christmas, Elena." She closed the door gently, not with finality, but with peace. Inside, the fire crackled. Laughter rose like music. A baby cooed in someone's arms. She walked back to the circle, took Sophia's hand, and joined the next song. Outside, Ricardo stood a moment longer, watching the warm light spill through the windows. Light he once thought he owned, but now knew he'd only borrowed. Then he turned and walked down the snow-covered path, boots crunching softly, breath steady, heart lighter than it had been in years. He didn't look back, because he didn't need to. The mansion behind him wasn't his prison or his prize. It was her sanctuary, and that was enough. Far away, in some nameless city, Camila scrolled through photos of luxury yachts, chasing a dream that would never love her back. But here, in the quiet snow, 2 souls had found something rarer than passion: truth. And in that truth, they were finally free. Elena glanced out the window one last time. saw his figure disappear into the winter night. Then she closed the curtain, not to shut him out, but to protect the peace she'd built. And as the firelight danced on the walls, she knew some endings aren't losses. They're the ground from which new lives grow.